My life inverted when I was a teenager. After my parents divorced, my mom gained full custody of my younger sister Maria, who is 7 years my junior, and me. My dad said at the time he found it difficult to manage our upbringing. Dad vanished for a time. He claimed he needed a break to figure things out. That still makes my fury boil. His whole attention was on Maria as he started showing up once more. Reasonably, I knew she was younger and most likely needed him more. But emotionally, it sting. As an adolescent, I yearned for a fragment of attention from my dad. But with time, the animosity grew until I either came second or not at all. He seemed to be working on his relationship with Maria, organizing events, and being there for her turning points. Regarding myself, all that remained was a residual sense of desertion. Dad tried to reconnect as I grew older, but it always felt hollow. I could sense he wanted to reduce his own guilt more than he would have developed a friendship with me. I therefore maintained his distance from me. At best, we were friendly, but I didn't trust him years later when he ran across Jane, a late 50s woman at a pub. They clicked, and shortly she started to show up in his life regularly. Dad deserved to be happy, so I had no trouble with his moving on. Nevertheless, Jane soon started to cause problems. She seemed obviously on a mission from the first moment I met her. She seemed to be working on fixing my relationship with Dad, as though it were her own. Jane would bring it up every time we crossed paths. Her approach was forceful and always pressing, always invading our dynamic. She would say things like, "Your dad just wants his daughter back," or "You need to give him a chance." At first, I tried to be courteous, but her tenacity made me snap. She should not have interfered. My relationship with my dad was between him and me. That had no effect on her. If anything, that made her double down last summer. The breaking point arrived. Dinner was at Maria's apartment, and we were all talking about a forthcoming family trip Dad had scheduled. I informed Jane I was not going when she asked what I thought about the vacation. She started pressuring me right away about it, asking why I wouldn't go and accusing me of excluding Dad. The exchange turned into a full-fledged quarrel. That was it for me. She accused me of being petty, of clinging to the past, and then she had the galacity to call me Mom's lapdog. I became blank. Dad got involved, naturally attempting to mediate, but by then the damage was done. She didn't know me, my life, or my history with my dad. I told her I wasn't going to put up with her interference any longer. Telling them both to go alone, I hurried out. Furious at how the evening had turned out, Maria finally kicked them out as well. Months passed, and I knew I would have to face them finally due to Maria's approaching wedding. After that night, I stopped talking to Dad and Jane entirely. I agreed to go, but stay back. I had made terms with not having a close relationship with Dad, and was not ready to let Jane mar my sister's big day. Then, a few days ago, Maria dropped a bombshell. She informed me Jane was the maid of honor she chose. I should have seen it coming, but I couldn't keep quiet when Maria said Jane would be her maid of honor. I stopped for a moment, then hurried out. "Wait, what?" Maria appeared defensive straight instantly, as though she had been preparing for this talk. "Jane's been really nice to me," she said. I wanted to protest, but she has always been encouraging and we have gotten really close. I wanted to find out if she recalled how Jane called her Mom's lapdog in her apartment just months ago, or if she had forgotten everything that happened. But I bit my tongue instead. Maria was having her wedding here. She was entitled to designate anybody she wished to be by her side. "Still," Maria said, it seemed like a slap in the face. "She'd been trying to get in touch with you. She wants to atone for all that transpired. She truly did feel horrible." I shook my head. "Maria, it makes no difference whether she feels horrible. Her behavior or treatment of me remains the same." Maria's face dropped and I could see she was offended. I had made peace with avoiding her. You really should give it some thought. I want both of you to spend daily time with me. Please." I felt my chest tighten as the guilt trip got powerful. I detested Maria for disappointing me. Yes, I did. I knew my limitations, though, as well. I inhaled deeply, attempting to cool off. "Listen, I will still be at your wedding. For the world, I would not miss it. But I'm not a bridesmaid if Jane is your maid of honor." Maria's eyes started to water, and I felt like the worst person in the world. I don't want to be in a situation whereby I have to deal with her continually. But you are my sister, she continued, her voice shaking. I have always pictured you standing next to me on my wedding day. I felt a pang of guilt so strong it nearly hurt. And I shall be there, I added softly. I will be among the supporters, urging you in the crowd. But as a bridesmaid, I cannot do it. She begged me to rethink, tears running down her face indicating too much. It took everything in me to resist caving in. She eventually gave in. Fine, she answered gently. Still, you know it hurts quite a bit. I stayed quiet since I knew nothing to say to it. The following few days were chaos. I simply wanted us to be family. Maria apparently informed Dad and Jane about my choice since my phone began to blast texts. Dad sent most of them, although a couple from Jane as well. Dad said I was spoiling Maria's great day by not showing up for the wedding reception and accused me of being immature. I ignored him when he even said, "This is exactly why I wanted to fix things between us. Your attitude is impossible." To be honest, I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I would regret. Jane's texts mixed guilt-tripping with false apologies. She claimed she only wanted us to get along for Maria's benefit, and that she never meant to hurt me. She even highlighted how much Maria looked up to me and how my rejection to be a bridesmaid would break her heart. It was all manipulation, and I wasn't going for it. When I eventually spoke with Maria once more, she was quieter than normal. Trying to keep things light, I asked her how the wedding was looking. She sighed and continued, "Truthfully, it has been trying. The whole bridesmaid idea infuriates Dad and Jane. I felt my blood heat up. Why are they agitated, Maria? You are having your wedding. It's not about them." She paused, then spoke in a way that really touched a nerve. "They think you're being selfish." I laughed bitterly. "Selfish?" asks regarding enforcing limits. "In order to preserve my peace?" She answered fast, stating, "I'm not saying I agree with them. I want everything to run without problems. I want no drama, thus, maybe they should back off." I snapped. "I have already compromised by deciding to attend the wedding at all. I owe no one else Jane. Dad? Long ago he lost his right to comment on my life." Maria stared at me as though she wanted to dispute, but she did not. Rather, she merely nodded silently. She responded, "I understand. Sure I do. Still, I truly hope you can work toward harmony with them." Later that evening, I curled up on my couch, mentally reliving the talk. I detested running counter to Maria. I never wanted to hurt her. She was among the few people I actually loved. Still, how far was I meant to bend for her benefit? When did it start to be excessive? Though I wanted to make her happy, I realized I couldn't compromise my limits to do so. Not for Dad, nor for Jane. My chat with Maria left me feeling exhausted. Avoiding my phone for the next 4 days, I wanted no more guilt-tripping texts or discussions. Of course, it did not stop there. Dad phoned me one evening. I debated whether I should pick up for a protracted period of time staring at the screen. Against my better judgment, I responded, attempting to sound impartial. "Hey," I said. "Hey, yourself," he returned, his tone already slightly annoyed. "We have to talk." I groaned. "What's happening?" he said. "Maria's really upset," and I knew exactly where this was headed. "She believes you are not helping her." To be honest, I do not blame her. I tightened my jaw, attempting to be cool since you are making this more difficult than it needs to be. "I will be attending her wedding. In every sense I can, I'm helping her without compromising my limits." He sighed frustratedly, "Not sure what to tell you if it is not enough for you." "It has nothing to do with limitations. It has to do with supporting your sister. She wants you to be part of her big day." "I'm going to be part of her big day?" I shot back. "I'll be here, Dad." "But if it means being bound to Jane for every decision and detail, I cannot be a bridesmaid." There was a lengthy silence, and I could feel the tension across the phone. "You know," he remarked at last, "you have always been somewhat stubborn, always clutching resentment. That really connected." "Grudges," I said again, my voice getting louder. "This is not about harboring resentment. This relates to how Jane treated me, about her calling me Mom's lapdog, which made me feel like garbage for not wanting to engage in happy family. Do you even give that affected me any thought?" "She was merely frustrated," he replied dismissively. You've never given her a chance. I shot back, not owing her any chance. She entered our problems knowing nothing at all. Dad was silent for a time. She doesn't get to stroll in and demand that I forgive and forget simply because it makes things easier for her. You're being childish, he said later. That was the last straw. You know what, Dad? I've finished our talk. Maria has already heard from me about how I feel, and I am being consistent. We have nothing more to talk about if you cannot respect that. I disconnected up before he could reply, my palms quivering with rage. He continually twisted things around on me, which made me feel as though I was the one failing. But I was not a teenager anymore, and I would not allow him to control me. A few days later, Maria called. Her speech was quiet, almost reluctant. Hey, she said. Could we perhaps chat? I said, already bracing myself. Of course, she sighed a little. Dad told me about your disagreement. I rubbed my temples and felt a headache starting. Maria, I am not trying to complicate matters for you. I only have to guard my peace. I know, she answered fast. I do indeed. Simply put, this is spiraling out of control overall. Dad and Jane will not stop talking about it. And I felt a twinge of shame as I seemed to be in the middle. Though I hated her being caught in the crossfire, I couldn't back down. Maria, this is stressing you out. I'm sorry. Still, you have to know from where I'm coming from. Jane has not brought me pardon. Dad? Maria was quiet for a minute. He has no right to demand anything from me following all he put me through. I understand, she said at last. Actually, I do. Nevertheless, I want different things could be. Her comments really affected me harder than I anticipated. I wish we could all just get along, even for one day. I wanted for the same thing. I wished my relationship with Dad wasn't so damaged, that Jane hadn't made everything worse, that Maria didn't feel she had to act as peacemaker. Still, hoping had little effect on reality. I know, I answered gently. I hope also that. She didn't argue, though, and I was appreciative of that. As the wedding drew near, the anxiety just seemed to increase. This is the best I could do for now. Dad and Jane persisted in attempting to connect, but I turned off their calls and texts. Maria, to credit, never pushed me any farther. Though she was not pleased about it, she seemed to accept my choice. The guilt persisted. Though I knew I was acting morally for myself, I couldn't get rid of the sensation I was disappointing Maria. I kept going back over all of our talks in my brain, wondering whether there was any way to bring everyone around. In the end, I had to choose myself. The response was always the same regardless of how I viewed it. Someone would be harmed. And I never felt bad about it. First, in a long time. Maria's wedding was a swirl of conflicting feelings in the days before. Though this was her big day after all, I wanted to be thrilled for her but couldn't get rid of the weight in my chest. Every time I considered the wedding, Jane front and center was playing the ideal maid of honor. Still, I kept reminding myself, this wasn't about Jane. It felt improper, as if she was taking a role not hers to perform. It concerned Maria. I was not going to let my emotions eclipse her delight. Anyhow, Maria contacted me a couple more times to discuss the wedding logistics. I kept telling myself. Every time I could tell she was gingerly avoiding discussing Jane or Dad, treading on eggshells. Although Maria prepared a little rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, her effort did not simplify matters. I argued about whether or not to go. Knowing Dad and Jane would be there, the thought of sitting through a meal with them was nearly intolerable. Ultimately, though, I chose to turn up for Maria, and the scene was strained. Maria welcomed me friendlily, but her eyes clearly showed concern. Already there, seated at a table close to the front, were Dad and Jane. I took a seat at the rear and avoided their eyes. The supper was, to put it mildly, uncomfortable. Dad tried to strike up a conversation with me once, but I politely and succinctly responded. Maria did her best to keep things light, but I could sense she was stressed. Jane avoided direct conversation with me, but I noticed her staring my way a few times. Liam, her fiancé, apparently sensed it as well. He gently drew her away several times, murmuring to her and flashing encouraging looks. Liam appealed to me as he was a decent man and obviously loved Maria. As the event came to an end, Maria walked up to me and softly stated, "Hey, I just hoped he could keep her grounded through all this craziness. Thanks for coming. It means a lot. Of sure, I said. She hesitated, then said, tomorrow. I wouldn't miss it. I know it could be challenging. I really want you to know, though, how much it means to me that you will be there. Her remarks really hit me like a gut check, even if things aren't ideal. I will be there, I said. No matter what. She grinned, but it didn't really reach her eyes. The morning of the wedding was stressful. I wanted to say more to comfort her that everything would be fine. The words would not come. Getting ready at home, I tried to concentrate on the thrill of the day instead of the stress building for weeks. When I got to the event, the room was humming with activity. I had chosen a basic yet attractive dress, one that wouldn't catch too much attention but still seemed suitable for the occasion. Maria looked gorgeous in her wedding gown. Her face exuded delight. All of my fears vanished for a moment. She deserved every ounce of happiness this day provided her. As I settled in, I noticed Dad and Jane seated close to the front. Acting the ideal maid of honor, Jane was obsessing over some last-minute details. My tummy turned over, but I pushed myself to turn away. The ceremony was lovely. Maria and Liam exchanged moving vows that brought everyone to tears. The reception was another tale, but for that little instant, all the anxiety vanished, and the pure delight of seeing my sister wed the love of her life took front stage. I found myself face to face with Dad as soon as the formalities were finished, and people started mingling. I'm glad you came, he said, his tone softer than it had been in our last chat. Of course I came, I added. Maria's my sister. He nodded and looked down at his glass. You know, she was really hoping you would rethink being a bridesmaid. My jaw tightened. We've already had this conversation, Dad. I know, he said hurriedly. Having you two at odds bothers me. Your sisters are one another. You are meant to stick together. I looked at him, trying to retain my cool. Maria and I are doing well. Not about her. Here is this. This concerns Jane. He shook his head and sighed. Jane has been trying, you know. She has been nothing but friendly to Maria. That's great, I remarked sternly. Can't you just let it go? It doesn't erase how she treated me, he inquired, his voice tinged with annoyance. My patience snapped. Let it go, then. Like how you let me depart from childhood? Like how you vanished and left me to sort things out alone? Dad, do not advise me to let it go. When I'm ready to forgive, you don't get to choose. His face dropped, and I saw for the first time a flutter of sorrow in his eyes, but I wasn't in the right frame of mind to explore it. My heart thumping in my chest, I turned and left without further word. As the evening wore on, I tried to avoid both Dad and Jane. Toasting Maria's happiness, I danced with her and tried to concentrate on the positive aspects of the day, but the tension persisted, a black cloud hovering over the festivities. I was emotionally spent by the time I left. Tightly hugging Maria, I whispered in her ear, You looked wonderful today. She grinned through tears, clinging to me a little bit longer than normal. I'm so glad for you. Thank you, she remarked, for everything. I wondered as I drove home whether I had chosen wisely. Had I given Maria enough encouragement? Alternatively, had my limits drawn a wedge that would not be healable? I ran out of the responses. All I knew was that, for her and for me, I had behaved what I believed to be proper. I woke up the day following the wedding with an unusual range of feelings. In my chest whirled relief, remorse, and a residual sense of anxiety. Though the conflict with Dad and Jane left a bad taste in my mouth, I was happy I had been there for Maria. I lingered in bed longer than normal, lazily surfing my phone, when Maria sent a text through .Maria. Again, thanks for showing up yesterday. It meant quite a lot, honestly. Her comments brought me a smile. Apart from anything else I had promised her, what counted was that I showed up. A few hours later, my phone buzzed once more as I drank coffee. Dad sent this message this time. Dad said, "We need to talk." I let my eyes roll back. He could not let it go, of course, though another part, perhaps the one still searching for closure, decided to listen to him. Part of me wanted to disregard him. I answered and agreed to see him later that evening, We got together in a little coffee shop midway between our locations. When I got there, he was already there, seated at a corner table with hands encircling a steaming cup. His creases on his face were deeper, his posture somewhat depressed, and he seemed older than I could recall. I was taken aback by that. I had clung to the picture of him as this unbeatable hero for so long, let down. He felt human seeing him in this state. As I seated down, he remarked, "Thanks for coming, Dot." Though I nodded, I said nothing. I was not going to let him have this easy. Deeply breathing, he looked down at his mug. "I have been considering your wedding comment a lot, about releasing you." I said nothing and let him carry on. His voice low, he said, "You're right. I was not there for you the way I ought to have been. I made a lot of mistakes. I have spent years attempting to correct them. Now, though, I see perhaps that I have been approaching it the incorrect way." I was taken aback by that. I expected defensiveness along with apologies. Not like this. I thought if I could fix things with Maria, if I could make her life easier, then maybe it would make up what I didn't do for you, he said. And when I met Jane, she expressed interest in helping with it. She did just as advised. But as I see it now, we pushed too hard. I laughed a little and shook my head. Pushed too fiercely? Dad, you and Jane bargained your way into my life, behaving as though I owed you pardon just because you were ready for it. He stammered but did not argue. I am aware, and I apologize. I'm not sure what I considered. I just wanted things to be right once more. They were never good, I answered softly. You cannot reverse the past by pushing the present into some idealized form, Dot. He nodded carefully, considering what I had said. You're right. I wish I could go back and change things. That awareness eased something in me. I had been waiting for him to accept his shortcomings and own the suffering he had brought about for so long. Hearing him say it now seemed like a step in the right direction, but it did not erase the past. After a significant pause, I said, I appreciate you saying that. Still, it has no effect on my opinion of Jane. She crossed far too many lines, and I am not ready to pardon her. Possibly never will be my answer. And you will have to come to terms with that as well. Though he seemed uncomfortable, he nodded. I understand. For a while we sat silently, the weight of the discourse hovering between us. I felt for the first time in years that he was actually listening to me, not trying to defend himself or trying to argue, just listening. That evening, when I arrived home, I felt lighthearted. Though it was a start, the chat with Dad had not resolved everything. Though it wasn't the one he or Jane desired, I felt for the first time that there could be a forward path. A few days later, Maria gave a call. She sounded more at ease, more delighted. Her voice brilliant, she remarked, I just got back from our mini honeymoon. It was breathtaking. I grinned, real glad for her. I'm glad. You owe it. Thanks, she responded. She said, I heard you spoke to Dad, after a moment. Uncertain of her direction with this, I answered, yeah. She stopped, then carried on. He reported trying to back off. He stated he came to see he was overdoing it. That is true, I answered. We had a good conversation. He seems to be beginning to understand. I'm glad, she remarked gently. I know you have not found this easy, and I apologize if I added to that. You did not, I reassured her. You were only caught in the middle. I blame none of this on you. Thanks. That implies a lot. We seem to be in agreement for the first time in months. Maria and I had always had a close relationship, and I was not going to let this one with Dad and Jane sour us. That evening, I sat on my couch considering all that had transpired. Though it had been taxing, the wedding, the arguments, and the talks had also forced me to face issues I had been dodging for years. I knew nothing about the future for my connection with Dad or Jane, and I did not have all the solutions. One thing was obvious, though. I was at last learning to prioritize myself, to create limits and keep to them, and I felt as though I was in charge of my own life for the first time in a very long time. The weeks following the wedding saw things calm down. Maria and I returned to our regular pace and checked in with one another every few days. She appeared really delighted with Liam, and our talks seemed light and simple for the first time in a long time. Not mentioning Dad, Jane, or the wedding turmoil. Simply us. Dad, on the other hand, stayed clear. It was good by me since I hadn't heard from him since our coffee shop talk. I wanted time to sort through everything, and to be honest, I didn't believe he wouldn't revert into past behavior. If it accompanied strings, it was not an olive branch. Maria paid me an unexpected call one afternoon. "Hey," she murmured, sounding a little tense. "You have some time to get together?" "I ought to talk. Sure, I said. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, all is good. Having considered a number of things, I feel we should clear the air." I stopped listening to her words. I agreed to see her at our preferred coffee shop, even though I assumed we had already cleared the air. I wasn't going to turn her down if she needed to talk. Maria was waiting at a table next to the window when I arrived. She had a cappuccino in front of her, but she was merely idly stirring it. She could clearly feel her nervous energy. "Hey," I said, seated across from her. "What else is on your mind?" She smiled gently but did not respond immediately. Rather, she drank her latte and then gently set the cup down as though hesitating. She said at last, "Okay," inhaling deeply. "I have given everything that transpired with the wedding much thought, with Dad and Jane and, well, you." I nodded and started to brace myself. "I feel like I wasn't fair to you," she said. "I didn't really consider your feelings. I put you in an impossible situation. I neglected to consider how much I was asking of you since I was so preoccupied with keeping everyone happy." Her comments caught me off guard. Maria was not one to readily own mistakes, so hearing her say this felt like a weight off my chest. She then said, "I didn't want to make things harder for you. But I now see that I most likely did, and I apologize for that as well." I let out a breath I had not noticed I was holding. "Maria, I have no responsibility toward you for anything. Stuck in the center, your only goal was to maintain peace. I understand now." Her eyes sparkling with unshed tears, she nodded. "I simply find that things are so convoluted. I hope we could all simply continue as a family." Her comments really touched me, but I had no idea what to say. I naturally wanted that as well. Who would not want a functional, quiet family? But wanting has no effect like that. I answered quietly, "I do too." But Maria, moving on doesn't mean acting as though everything is good. It entails owning what happened, growing from it, and honoring one another's limitations. This is only going to work that way. She nodded once more, scrubbing at her eyes. "You're right. Just hoping Dad and Jane could make it as well." Following that talk, Maria and I felt closer than we had in months. It was great relief when she quit attempting to mend things between Dad and myself. Rather, we concentrated on our relationship and on ensuring that, among all else surrounding us, we stayed in touch. A few weeks later, Dad sent me an unplanned SMS. "Hey, I'd want to take you to lunch sometime, even though we have had our problems. Not Jane, simply us. Tell me, though." I debated whether or not to reply for a long period of time looking at the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to run away from the chance to reopen past hurts. But another side of me, a quieter, more hopeful side, thought maybe this was his attempt at a halfway meeting. Eventually I answered, "Okay, lunch sounds good. Tell me when you want to do this." When we first got together, it was embarrassing. Dad avoided eye contact and seemed uncomfortable fumbling with his silverware. He finally spoke, though, and to my astonishment, he did not dodge or offer apologies. He simply turned around and apologized. His voice low, he replied, "I know I've been a nasty dad. I want to be better even though I cannot change the past. For Maria as well as you, I did not let him off the hook immediately. I told him how his actions had affected me, how his absence and his partiality toward Maria had made me invisible. He listened, truly listened, and for the first time I sensed he was attempting to comprehend rather than defend himself. Though not flawless, the discourse moved in the correct direction. That day, as I left the eatery, I had a wary hope. Though things between Dad and me were far from set, perhaps, just maybe, we could start creating something fresh, under my terms. For days, I kept thinking about the lunch with Dad. I went over our talk over and over, breaking every word and every moment apart. Hearing him own his errors seemed strange. I had tuned myself for more dismissiveness and more excuses for so long. But this time, he seemed real. It was a beginning. It did not wipe the past. When I told Maria about it, she was quite happy. "That's fantastic," she exclaimed with great hope in her voice. "He seems to be truly trying." "I think so too," I said. "I am not going to jump into anything, though. I have still to give time." "That's fair," she remarked. "Grab it at your own speed. He has to win your confidence." More than I could say, her support meant. We felt as though we were at last on the same page, striving toward a time when we might all live without the weight of the past weighing us down. Dad texted me once more a few weeks later, wanting to see if we might get together. This time I advised a laid-back coffee shop close to my apartment. Though I didn't want to go into anything weighty, I reasoned we could start with something easy. When we got together, the discussion was nearly typical. We discussed Maria and Liam, about work, about the minor things that lacked the weight of our common past. It was unusual as well as refreshing. For far too long, strife defined my relationship with Dad. It felt like we were gingerly entering unknown ground now. He hesitated as we were finishing up, then remarked, "I realize I still have a lot to make up for. Still, you should know I am here. This time, I am not going anywhere." I nodded, a little flutter of hope flickering through me. "That is appreciated. This will take time, though, as I have indicated before." "I understand," he responded with a firm voice. Also ready to wait is me. My connection to Maria kept getting better in the meantime. We began spending more time together, calling late at night and organizing breakfasts. We seemed to be restoring the link that all the wedding turmoil had strained. She turned to me one evening as we were seated on her couch, eating pizza and watching a movie, and said, "I'm really proud of you, you know." I blinked, startled. "For what?" "Regarding standing your ground," she said. "For knowing what you need, and for not allowing someone to push you around. Though I know it hasn't been easy, you have managed it better than I could have." Her comments made me cough lumpy-wise. I said softly, "Thanks. That implies a great deal." She grinned and stretched across to grab my hand. "We will be fine, you know. Each of us. Though it will take time, we will reach there." Nodding, I hoped she was correct. About Jane, I stayed far away. Dad brought up once her desire to personally apologize, but I told him I wasn't ready for that. She could show me respect for my limits and give me space if she really felt bad about her behavior. She seemed to be doing such thus far, which I valued even if it would not heal the damage she had done. It was good to realize that I might never be able to forgive her. If forgiveness occurred at all, it happened spontaneously. You could not push it. Right now, I was happy with the peace her distance from me brought. Months went by till life gently resumed its routine. Maria and Liam settled into married life, and I discovered I was spending more time with them, especially around holidays. Dad began making more frequent calls, and although our connection was still developing, it felt less tense than it had years ago. I was learning to negotiate this new dynamic by juggling my need to advance with my limitations. It never would be, and was not flawless either. Still, it only needed to be honest. Perfect was not necessary. One evening, Maria's SMS buzzed on my phone while I watched the sunset on my balcony. "Hey, I wanted to say I love you. I appreciate you being my rock overall." Feeling warmth in my chest, I grinned. Though the road had not been easy, we had made it, and I became hopeful, for Maria, for myself, for even Dad at that same instant. Though we were hardly the ideal family, we were learning our way, and that is sufficient.